I changed the title of the lecture to, it was Evolution, Slump, and Comeback, but I'm a fan of the show, and it has something to do with that. But let me ask a few questions. I was expecting like a bunch of 20-somethings in here, and I'm glad that you're a little bit older. So I changed it to the Big Bang Theory of bicycles because if you want just a history of bicycles, you can get that on the internet. You can have that in 5 minutes, and you can just see the whole list. And of course, if you want sort of a history of the universe, you can probably find that on the internet. But I'm combining the two, and the challenge here is to make it relevant, and I will do my best. This is the Big Bang. That's a photograph of it, a rare photograph of it. Ya means years ago. So, and I have that on a lot of slides, so don't be confused the entire presentation. But the Big Bang, now when you look at this, if you were to witness the Big Bang, you might describe what you see as chaotic or something. And if you were to witness the next 8 billion years or so of goings-on in the universe and in our part of the Milky Way galaxy, you might also think, okay, it's bedlam, it's chaotic. But we know the universe is orderly, it's just that you might not recognize all the order. And this next slide I almost took out, but I just love it so much. This is the same rubber band ball distorted 3 different ways and overlapping. But what those rubber bands represent are orbits of planets and asteroids in the universe. And every place you see an intersecting rubber band, that's an intersecting orbit. And when you have intersecting orbits, eventually there's going to be a collision. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of time. And given like 9.2 billion years of intersecting orbits, 9.2 billion years of attrition, collisions, annihilations, this is what we ended up with. This is our solar system. This is a picture that you've probably seen, probably saw it in your 3rd grade class up on the wall. But have you ever looked at it in a little bit different light? You see the way the planets are orbiting the sun, like runners on a track or like cars in a multi-lane freeway. They're all in the same plane, and as long as they stay in their lanes, they don't collide, as long as other forces don't pull them together. So these are the survivors of all that orderly but intersecting orbits. And look what we ended up with. We ended up with the only place, this is the first bicycle tie-in, the only place in our solar system that the bicycle could possibly have been made, not just in our solar system, but also in the Milky Way galaxy, and probably actually in the universe. We've got photosynthesis, plate tectonics, good temperatures in air. We're protected from radiation. And any closer, if we were 5% closer, maybe 3, are there any astrophysicists or astronomers in the audience? I mean, honestly, reveal yourself. Is there anybody? Okay, good, then I don't have to ask anybody to leave the room. But there's this notion that, the cosmos are so vast, there must be other civilizations out there, there must be other beings out there, there must be other life forms, maybe they're looking at us. That's, for the most part, it's nonsense. I mean, from what we know about the universe and what is required for intelligent life, not microbial life, but intelligent life, we've got it. Whether you consider this an inevitable placement or a matter of luck, we do have it. This is Earth, and we have the only place where bicycles could have been made. And so this is 4.6 billion years ago. And a million years after that, I've redone my slides, so I have to get this. So if there were no Big Bang, no perfect spot in the solar system, no human life on Earth, and no chance for bicycles. There's 3 other events, 3 other cataclysmic events happened in the universe. And then, after that, I'll talk about the bikes, the development of bikes themselves, and bring it up to current times, and it'll all sort of tie together. The second event happened a million years later, 4.5 billion years ago. A lot of these events are well known, but sometimes people just need a reminder. This is Theia. It was about a quarter of the size of the proto-Earth at that time. That looks something like more than a proto-Earth. But it hit the Earth and broke off a bunch of chunks. And the chunks became the moon, and the moon orbits the Earth around 250,000 miles away, 250,000 miles away. So if there were no collision here, and again, this is not out of nowhere. Theia has been called a rogue planet before because it was not, I guess, expected. There was no one alive at the time to expect it or not, but it has been called a rogue planet. But rogue implies a certain amount of independence, a certain amount of disorder to it. And it was just one of the latecomers to the big collision party that happened before we got our solar system. So it wasn't a rogue planet. It was just behaving according to all the laws of the universe there. And let me see if there's anything else I need to say about this. Oh, yeah. What does the moon do for us? What does the moon have to do with bicycles? Okay, no Theia crash, no moon. We'd have extreme winds and temperatures. And this, remember, was 4.5 billion years ago. And primates, I think, have been around for about 8 million years. So this is a long time before that. But the moon stabilizes the Earth on its axis. It allows us to not be freezing and burning. It gives us moderate temperatures year-round. And it gives us a climate that selects for the kind of animal life that eventually became primates and people. We'd have much shorter days and really dark nights. Moonlight adds a lot to us, but the days might be 6-8 hours long. And all of these things are going to select for different kinds of life forms. It wouldn't be suited probably to human evolution. If you look at yourself in the mirror, you're really not suited to anything except living indoors. You've got no claws, you aren't strong, you can't handle heat, you can't handle the sun, you can't handle cold temperatures. And it would have been a really harsh environment on the moon if it weren't for this collision, so we would have had no bicycles. That's event number 2. This is a more famous one. It was 65 million years ago. And I apologize if you already know about this stuff, but it's probably been a long time since you have thought about the extinction of the dinosaurs, I'm guessing. And this was, it hit in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago. The asteroid that hit was 6 miles in diameter, and it traveled at about 10 miles per second. So it was huge, and this is, again, a well-known event. It was controversial until a few years ago, but it's widely accepted now. And it hit, and it killed the dinosaurs by kicking up all this dust and soot and changing the climate of the entire planet. So it was cold. Dinosaurs like desert. They like heat. They can't regulate their body temperature in cold weather. And it stopped the growing of the plants. First, the dinosaurs, up until this point, had been living for 165 million years. So they had a long reign. They were the dominant life form on Earth. But this killed the plants that fed the vegetarian dinosaurs. And when they were gone, there was no food for the carnivorous dinosaurs, and they died too. Now, at the same time, there were mammals around. Mammals at the time, 65 million years ago, were tiny. They were a couple inches long to maybe this long, and they lived underground, and they lived in the tops of trees. If you lived in a land that dominated by dinosaurs, you would stay out of harm's way. So that's why they were under the ground and in the tops of trees, and they ate insects, and insects can survive most things. So once the dinosaurs were gone, the mammals were free to evolve. They could come down, they could roam around without the threat of dinosaurs killing them. And so this started the mammal evolution 65 million years ago. And if the dinosaurs, there's evidence that they were on the decline then. But let's say they lived for another 10 million years. Okay, they'd already lived 165 million years. Even on the decline could include another 10 million years, maybe 20 million years. That would have been time for them to evolve into a more cold-tolerant variation, and at least it would have delayed the mammal evolution. Now, a lot of this is speculation, but it's not all far-fetched to think that if mammal evolution was delayed another 10 million years, that things wouldn't be different now. Let's see. There's that one. And we would have no bicycles. There's one more event, but it's not the next slide. Now, Homo sapiens have been around for 195,000 years, but it wasn't, I mean, the first 189,500 years of those, we didn't have a wheel. And we had a lot of other things, as the slide shows, but we didn't have a wheel. And why didn't we have a wheel? It's such a useful thing. It's not a complex thing. Why didn't we have a wheel? Anyone have any ideas?
We didn't have a road.
No roads. That is great. No use. Well, the other thing we didn't have was any tools to cut wood with. The tools at the time were bone tools and stone tools and wooden tools. And bone and stone are brittle. They're good for poking and ripping and cutting and slashing flesh. That's what they are for. And wood tools, you can dig the earth and dig out some roots or something like that. But you can't cut wood with stone or bone or wood tools. So somebody had to identify tin and copper in rocks, figure out how to extract them out of the rocks, melt them together in the right proportions to make bronze, and then figure out how to make woodworking tools out of bronze. And that was required to make the first wheel. This is not the oldest wheel, the first wheel, but it's the oldest wheel ever found, 5,200 years ago in Slovenia. Slovenia is sort of northeast of Italy, across the water. And the main part of the wheel there is ash. It's about this big in diameter, and the axle there is oak. It's 47.5 inches long. And you can see the square hole in the middle of the wheel and the little axle part that nests into it. And this is believed to be a part of a two-wheeled cart. It probably wasn't the first wheel because they'd probably make a scale model or they'd do something smaller just to test the concept. But this is the oldest wheel ever found. And once there were two-wheeled carts, then there were four-wheeled carts, and there were two-wheeled chariots and cannons and wagons and coaches and carriages over the next 5,000 years. I don't know what the next slide is. Okay. We're all learning together now. Oh, okay. But we didn't have wheels. We didn't have anything close to a bicycle, I should say, until the fourth and the last of the cataclysms in the universe. And this is Mount Tambora from Indonesia. Indonesia is it's volcanic. It gave us Krakatoa in 1883. Mount Tambora was less well known than Krakatoa, but it was 3 times bigger. It wasn't as well known because international communications weren't as good back then, so we just had to wait for it to make itself known. And it did that. It blew up on April 10th, 1815. And the following year, 1816, not the following summer, but the following year, was known as the year without a summer, because this had the same kind of effect as the asteroid that landed in the Yucatan did on the dinosaurs. It changed the climate by blocking the sun, making everything cold and rainy. And it wasn't just in Indonesia, it was all over the world. It hit Europe particularly hard, and in Germany, I don't know what the next slide is. Okay, well, here's a picture of the crater now. So it was a massive thing. And in Germany, there was a triple threat guy. He was a baron, he was a forest ranger, and he was a carriage maker. His name was Baron von Draisine. He was born Karl Draisine. And the horses were dying because they didn't have any food to eat. Of course, the animals were going to suffer first. And there was starvation among people also. It was a really dreary, cold year. Byron wrote some of his best poems in the funk of the sooty, cold environment there. And the baron, the forest ranger, needed to patrol his forest, and he didn't have a horse for that. So he was a carriage maker also, so he made this thing. And this is the first prototype. And see, this sort of brings it all together, if all these things hadn't happened. So I think the call-outs do some of my talking for me. But there it is. And you can see how that, if you could make a carriage, and he was a carriage maker, you could certainly make a carriage light. Same materials, same processes, just simpler to make. It doesn't have a platform to carry anything. And it does have a steering wheel, sort of like the reins of the horse, and you don't see any pedals on it because you paddled it. And I think the next one, yeah, that's how you did it. And it worked for the summer of 1816, so it did its job. But by 1817, the climate was back to normal, and food was growing, and horses were healthy again, and people were back on their horses. And the press was particularly hard on this. It said that, well, on a rocky road, it wouldn't roll. On a snowy road, you'd get cold feet. In the muck, they'd be all muddy. You couldn't cross a creek with it. Your feet would get wet. All good points. You couldn't paddle it up a hill, and it was dangerous downhill. But it still was an important bike in the development of the bicycle. And one of the here's a modern one. Isn't that a great picture, though? You know, these things are called balance bikes, and interestingly enough, they were sort of more popular in Germany, where the Draisine, I'm sorry, I should have said that. These are typically known as Draisines, at least the original one. And the other ones, you know, they have to market them. They don't want to say it's a Draisine. So they're balance bikes, and this one is called the Scoot, and it's all wood, and they're made of different materials. But it's the best way to learn how to ride a bike. You know, if you have a child who doesn't know how to ride a bike, or an adult who doesn't know how to ride a bike, I know adults who learn to ride bikes just by lowering the seat on the bike, taking off the pedals so they can flat-foot it on the ground. And it's a great way to learn how to ride a bike, because you learn the same techniques that you need when you're riding a bike. You learn balance, and you learn to take a corner by leaning, not by turning the handlebars. So it's the same kind of thing. And once kids get going fast on this, they don't even want to give them up. Once you get proficient on this, you know, sometimes kids keep wanting them for like 3, 4, 5 months. But eventually, if you can do this, you coast, you can put pedals on a bike, and you can pedal it. So and these things are available everywhere. But the point is, without a Mount Tambora eruption, plants would have grown, horses lived, Drace would have ridden one, no Draisine, no proto-bikes, and then no bicycle. And that also got the whole, that was the first of the proto-bicycles, or the first of the bicycle-like devices. The second one was in Scotland in 1839, a blacksmith named Kirkpatrick Macmillan. He actually saw a Draisine in 1824, but he had a lot of blacksmithing to do, so it took him until 1839 to make this. And the improvement here was it got your feet off the ground. You didn't have to paddle the bike. You still had to kickstart it, you know, with a push on the ground. But here it just used machine movements from sewing machines and steam locomotives. Treadles attached to levers, and your feet would move back and forth like that, and the levers were attached to the rear axle, and they would drive the rear wheel. Kind of a clever thing, but it had limited appeal. There were three-wheelers made this way, and quadricycles made this way also, but it never really took off. But it was also improved upon down in France in 1863, 1864. Here's the bike that could first be called a bicycle, and I think anybody would call this a bicycle because it has rotary cranks. It has pedals attached to the front axle, which doesn't define it as a bicycle, but you pedaled in a circle like this. And you know, this is a milestone in the development of the bicycle, and I'm going to criticize it anyway. And I mean, I mean, I understand that it did a good job, but let me just look at this from a bicycle designer's point of view. This is an unfair way to look at it. I understand it, but I want to explain a few things. When you attach the cranks and the pedals to the front wheel, and then you pedal the bike, every time you push down, like on the right pedal, the wheel goes to the left, and every time you push down on the left, it goes to the right. So as you're pedaling, the wheel is going like this. You know what a unicyclist looks like? You know, when they start pedaling, you know, the wheel is going like this, and the same thing happens here. And but you can get used to it. I mean, if somebody can learn to ride a unicycle, they could certainly learn to ride this. The front wheel was a little bit bigger than the rear wheel. That part is fine. It gave a bigger gear. But the thing is, this is a 36-inch front and a 30-inch rear wheel. And it didn't give a big enough gear, because after these were around for a year or so, of course, this is the bike that started the bicycle industry in France and in the United States and in other parts of Europe. And after they were out for a year or two, people wanted to race them. And when you have a 36-inch front wheel and it's a direct drive, you have cranks attached to the front wheel like that, you have what is, I assume a lot of you are bicycle riders here, maybe you know what a 36-inch gear is. It's equivalent about to on a 700C wheel bike to a 3928, something like that. So, and this is a fixed, there's no coasting on this. So it had a fairly low gear, and it limited how fast you could go on the flat. You know, your strength would never be an issue. It's just like how fast you could pedal. And of course, if you were going downhill on a fixed gear with a bike like that, the pedals would be whirring around too fast. So racers wanted something a little bit faster than this. So after about 4 or 5 years of this is what racers got us. This is an example, the first example of racers sort of hijacking bicycle design and sending it in the wrong direction. Because it's a big front wheel. You know, this is sort of an icon of cycling, and it's associated with the good old days of bicycles and riding and ice cream shops and barbershop quartets, all that kind of parade stuff. But I have one of these. They're still being made, actually, and they're made in Alameda, California. You can get one for $1,000. And I got one for my business and for myself, because I thought we have a bicycle business, we should have had the experience on this. You know, it's good to have that perspective. And $1,000. But it's hard to get on. You can see, I'm going to try the laser for the first time. Okay, right there is a little stub that you stand on, and you put your hands on the handlebar and you put your foot on the stub, and you sort of hop along, getting it moving forward, then you launch up into the seat. And it's awkward to do, it's scary, and it really made bikes sort of the exclusive toy of daring young, wealthy men. And it did that because women at the time wore these big floppy dresses, and the spokes were dangerous for those. If you were an old person back then, and back then like 40 was old, you know, you wouldn't want to get up there so high and risk falling. If you were injured, you know, bicycles are so good, they're good rehab machines for anyone with an injury, but back then it would just, you'd risk more injury. And it still had that pedaling the front wheel feeling. You know, when the guys at work and I got on this for the first time, that was the dominant thing. Oh my God, you know, I can't steer this thing. I pedal it and it goes left, and then I have to force the handlebars back, force the wheel back in line. But, you know, you can do this, and people did go fast on them, and you can look at pictures of people just careening down hills on these things, and it was terrifying. And the fact that you can learn to ride it doesn't take away from, I think it's a fact, that this is a horrible bicycle design. And yet, you know, and I respect it as part of the history and culture of bicycles. You know, I don't want to get in trouble for that, but it is not a good design, and it was a step back, I would say, from, let me see if this will work, from that one. And this was known in its day as the Ordinary because it dominated for such a long time. It was the ordinary bike, and there were a few other variations of bikes out there, but this was the Ordinary. high wheeler, same thing. It was also known as a penny farthing. I don't need to go in that just because of the proportions of the wheel sizes. But it was a scary bike. It dominated in Europe for about 16 years. And in the United States it kept going for another 3 or 4 years after that. It was strong, but there was something better coming up. In 1884, 1885, it was the first successful attempt at an improvement on the ordinary. People were getting, not everyone even rode the ordinary, so there was a demand for a different kind of bike. And this is the Rover was the model, and this is the safety bicycle. A couple English guys named Starley came up with this, and you can see the improvements. The saddle's a lot lower to the ground, so if you fell, it was no big deal. And well, here, okay. And it's a rear-wheel chain drive. So, it's just like the bikes that we all ride now. It's a chain drive in the rear wheel. But, you see that it still sort of borrowed the proportions from the ordinary bike. It still has maybe not as wacky proportions, but it still has an oversized rear wheel and oversized front wheel and a smaller rear wheel. So even with the gearing that could compensate a little bit for that, it was still clearly inspired by the ordinary bike. And these are the bad things. What would now be called the head tube angle of the bike, it was like 90 degrees or 89 degrees. It was really steep, and the steering was really awkward. This handlebar was between the saddle and the steering axis of the front wheel, and it should have been right on top of the front wheel. But this was the bike that got people onto bikes who weren't riding bicycles before. So this was a game changer for bicycle riding. It still had the hard rubber tires, though, and it still needed some improvements. Oh, yeah, there's the other thing. The saddle is almost directly above the cranks, and right now we tilt that back a little bit. Oh, yeah, there it is. This is my first really PowerPoint thing. Maybe my last. About 3 years later, this was made by the Singer Bicycle Company, Singer Sewing Machines. It's the same thing. And you see the main frame there's more triangulation in it. It's the thing that makes a bicycle frame strong and efficient and rigid and not require too much materials. It's the same thing that makes like the electrical towers or every bridge or every building strong. It's triangles. So you can see, okay. You can see sort of the triangle in there. And ideally, it would go down to there. That thing doesn't need to be curved there, but it kind of looks good, I think. I think it does look good. And, the steering axis here, everything is all in line, and then the handlebars are right above the fork there. So this was a huge improvement, and this was only after 3 years. And there were other variations of this, but this is typical of the improvements. I don't know what the next slide is. Oh, yeah. In 1888, I'm going to go back to that slide. The same year in 1888, I'm going to skip over this really fast, but it was key. In Scotland, a guy named John Dunlop developed the first inflatable tire, the first pneumatic tire. He had a 10-year-old son named Johnny who had a big-wheeled tricycle and was complaining about the bumps. He was a clever guy. He actually made harnesses for horses with air in them because he loved animals, and it was softer for the horse. So he knew how to do things with pneumatics, and he developed the first practical pneumatic tire. And by 1890, it was on bicycles. And you see that the frame has also sort of evolved. It's gotten a little bit more triangulation to it. There could be ways to improve this one, but this is a nice looking bike. It's got good chubby tires, good strong frame, practical. This is a bike that anybody here in the room could hop on, throw a leg over and ride no problem. This is not a bad bike. This is pretty good. And this is 1890, and this bike is important because the combination of the safety frame, with a lower seat, and the air-filled tires created the first American bike boom, and everything that I'm talking about now is happening in America. And, by the mid-1890s, 1893, 1894, there were 300 manufacturers of bicycles in the United States, 25 in Chicago alone. Bicycles, even the high-wheelers sold for like $150, $140, and these were still really expensive bicycles. So now, bicycles were ridden by all but poor people. And so it was still sort of a rich person's club. I mean, you can get a bicycle for less than $100 now, and this is 1890, and they were more than $100. And but this is the bicycle that started the boom. But in 1890, other things were happening too. There were golf and tennis had been imported to the United States recently, and so the disposable income was being diverted to them. People were developing motors and putting motors on carriages and motors on bicycles. And by 1896, people stopped buying bicycles in the United States. Bicycle manufacturers went out of business really fast. There was a used market for bicycles, so by mid-1890s, 1895, you could pick up a bike for $10, $15 even. But people stopped riding bicycles. There was other ways to spend money. They were sort of tired of them, and they had a little bit of competition from golf and tennis. But this is the thing that really, really killed bicycles. This is a motorcycle, and obviously it would not have happened if it weren't for a bike. They just put a motor on a bike, modified it a little bit. This is the Indian company. Probably couldn't name it that now, but do they still have the Florida Seminoles?
Oh, yes.
Seminoles? Okay. Good luck keeping that. There's the gas tank there, but but there was a transportation revolution going on at the turn of the century. There's a Cadillac 1903 Model T. This is a great looking motorcycle. It's a Flying Merkle from 1911. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. So the best artists and the best engineers from the cycling industry were now going to cars and motorcycles. And, the canvases were bigger. There were so many opportunities to put fancy things and beauty and colors in them. And that, you don't have to be a motorcycle. Anybody in here who's never ridden on a motorcycle, never even wants to. You look at that 1911 Flying Merkle, and it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. And this is bicycles. And it's a cool bicycle. There is nothing wrong with this bike. I personally like the look of this bike quite a lot. It's $12, and the reason the price came down so far, remember they were like $150, $160, $140, $120 before this, is that only children were buying them. Adults didn't want to have anything to do with bicycles once the car and motorcycle came around. So a lot of bike makers went out of business, and all of the marketing, all the advertising was to children. And when a bike is marketed as a child's device, of course nobody wants to ride it except children, and children themselves didn't really like to ride them. And here's more competition. That is a beautiful thing. It's gorgeous. And that's 1914. Now imagine, if you were a guy dating in 1914, a car or one of these would give you greater range. And if you showed up at the young lady's house on one of these, she'd want to go with you. And on a bicycle, like, okay, here I am, babe, but swing a leg over your bike and let's go pedaling. It might not have worked. So, it's a beautiful machine. But bicycles and bicycles started copying motorcycles because people liked motorcycles and cars, and so the bicycles took on their attributes, and it happened way before the 50s. It happened in the 20s and the 30s. And the American bicycle for most of the 1900s was like a one-speed with fat tires. The fat tires were inspired by the fatter tires of motorcycles. I've got the call-outs. I don't need to use the laser on there, but the fender ornament up there, looks like a light on the Schwinn there. That at least mimics the fender ornament on the Ducati. Bicycles took on these fat top tube kind of things, and sometimes they were for storage, sometimes they were purely cosmetic that mimicked the gas tanks on the motorcycles. And the streamers on the handlebars, those aren't just decorations. That was supposed to be the exhaust on the bike. So you get your bike with streamers, and you go as fast as you could and see if you could get them hanging out the back. That's what streamers are. But nice looking motorcycles, and bikes were sold to kids as, well, this is what you ride until you can get a car. You learn to be a good bicycle rider and you'll be a good car driver or motorcycle rider. The only time in the 1900s, in the mid-central 1900s, when adults were encouraged to ride bicycles was during World War II, when there was materials rationing. And only two bicycle manufacturers, I think it was Columbia and Huffy or something, were allowed to make bikes during World War II. And at that point, adults were encouraged to ride a bike to support the troops. It was the support the troops thing way back then. And we won the war, there was money around, there was prosperity, there was progress, everyone was happy. And if you were riding a bike as a form of sacrifice, then you would just associate a bike with hard times then. So the association with, they're only for kids and they're only for adults during hard times, made it hard for any sort of adult kind of bicycle market to develop. People didn't want to have anything to do with them. And during World War II, and not during, but after World War II, the urban environment, the whole urban landscape was designed around the car. There was no consideration that an adult might actually want to commute or go anywhere on a bike. Adults didn't ride bikes. If you were, or your parents or grandparents did not ride bikes probably. I mean, if they were a recent expat from Europe, maybe they showed up with a bike, but it didn't really happen in the United States. And I just wanted to show these cars. That's a 1929 Cord, that's a 1937 Talbot, and that's a 1941. You notice it's a green ribbon winner at some bike carnival, and that is a Chrysler LeBaron. It would be a great story if Chrysler named it after Baron von Drace, but I don't think so. But isn't that those are beautiful looking cars, and this is what bicycles had to compete with. Cars were easy, they were beautiful. I mean, the one on the upper left, you would want that whether you were a pimp or an organic farmer. It would appeal to anybody. And I'm not a car person, I don't know the history of that, but I mean, it's a beautiful car. Okay, now things started to happen in the 60s. The 60s were, there have always been generation gaps and arguments between the younger and older generation, but I think the 60s, it was probably bigger than it ever has been before. And I'd probably say that because I sort of grew up in the 60s, and I was still a young kid in the 60s, but I saw what was happening. And so there were arguments about civil rights, the Vietnam War, hippies, drugs, music, hair, clothing, and the environment. Okay, on January 28th, 1969, the songs were just to bring you to 1969. The biggest environmental disaster in the U.S. to date. Does anyone know where it is? You guys are in Florida, if you've been in Florida. Oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara. It was a 12-day oil spill. That's a whale. And it was huge news because the environmental movement had already started. In 1962, Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. That was the start of an environmental movement. And young people were especially conscious of protecting the earth. The older generation, not as much, but young people certainly were. And this inspired Gaylord Nelson, Democrat from Wisconsin, to start Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. And this is a huge day in the turning point of the bicycle story in the United States. Because on Earth Day, kids protested pollution by riding the bikes to school. The thing with Earth Day is that you were supposed to get around without using gasoline or oil. In my high school, there was a student body of 1,600. One kid rode his bike to school a few days a week, maybe. Up until that point on Earth Day, 500 kids did, and every day after Earth Day for the rest of my time in high school, probably 200, 250 kids rode their bikes. Now you could finally ride a bike without being a little child again. It was a form of protest, pro-environment. There was dignity to riding a bike. It wasn't like you were reverting to childhood anymore. And this was mostly good for teenagers and young 20s. You know, there might have been some 25ers, but you know, if you were above, mid-20s or above, you may not have participated. And this started the modern bike industry. So that means manufacturers suddenly started supplying more bike gear, more bike equipment. Cycling magazines popped up to spread information on it. And the bike media, and bikes were ripe for diversifying and growth. And a lot of things started happening. So this is sort of the bicycle explosion in America. And it looks like Endless Summer, the little movie thing. It does, but it's actually on any Sunday. But, you know, there had to be, you know, I mean, one of them had to be aware of the other. But on any Sunday is a motorcycle movie, and this is one of the opening scenes in it. It's for motocross riders and motorcycle riders, and it got kids back on the Stingrays. These Stingrays are from the mid-'60s, maybe late '60s. Everyone had a Stingray. And you know, they couldn't be like the guys in the movie and the motocrossers, but they were riding bicycles like them. They were using their bikes as little motorcycles. And it started the BMX movement. The BMX movement was the first big bicycle movement in the United States. And although these kids look like they're about 11 or 12 years old, they're enthusiastic about bikes. They weren't looking forward to getting rid of the bikes. I didn't ride a bike from 12 to 15. That's only 3 years, but I didn't even want a bike. I didn't expect to ever ride a bike again until Earth Day happened. And then June and Greg Seipel, Dan and Liz Burden. Dan still lives in Florida. But they went on Hemistour. Hemistour was a ride from Alaska to the tip of South America. And they did this in 72 and 73. National Geographic covered the first leg of it. A lot of publicity. Dan and Liz, Dan got sick in Mexico, had to turn back, but the other two completed it. But these 4 people started an organization called Bike Centennial. And the first thing on the agenda of Bike Centennial was to map a route from Oregon to Virginia, sort of right across the country, follow our map, follow our guide. Here's where to stop. Here's how many miles to cover in a day. Here's the route you take. And that started the touring movement in the United States. And by this time, there were more manufacturers, more media, more information, and bicycle riding was not for kids any longer. And the original Earth Day people continue to age. That was in 1970. First Bike Centennial ride was 1976, so they had gained 6 years. And this is important to understand. The seed crop for all of us riding bikes now were the original Earth Day riders. I mean, this is my opinion, but the evidence seems incontrovertible. And so as riders continue to age, they are role models for other adults in their age. You know, if you see other 29-year-olds riding a bike, then you think it's okay to ride a bike. But if all you see is kids riding a bike, then it may not be cool to ride a bike. Also in 1977, the first brand new mountain bike, first purpose-built mountain bike. Up until that time, mountain bikes, this is an old story, but it's still sort of interesting, and I'll talk fast. But they were made of modified 1930s, 1940s, 1950s Schwinn's and other cruiser bikes, but this is the first purpose-built mountain bike. Joe Breeze and Charlie Kelly and Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie were big figures in the early years of the mountain bikes. And then 4 movies. Oh, wait. No. 4 movies. Breaking Away. You know, I saw this, I walked out of it the first time. I was racing bicycles at the time, and I had some differences of opinion regarding some of the technical inaccuracies of the movie, and I walked out of it in a huff. The guy was pedaling fast to the sound of a freewheel, and that wouldn't work. And he was on a small chain ring, in a place where he wouldn't be. But I did end up seeing it again. This got a lot of my friends into bike racing, and this really did a lot to help bicycle racing in the country. It was a corny movie, but everyone ought to see it. If you ride a bike, get this on streaming or whatever that kind of thing is. Then the other thing, what movie? Good. Yeah. That's Elliott and E.T. And those are BMX bikes, and that just sort of reinfused the BMX movement with kids getting on bikes again. Then racing started to happen. Greg LeMond had a good 80s. He won 3 Tours de France. And mountain bikes were in the 90s started getting more motorcycle-like with suspension forks. And this is when racing really starts to dominate. And racing is cool, it's good, but the thing is, it tends to dominate. And a lot of people got race bikes, and you can start racing and quit racing, as I did. But the 80s and 90s particular were really race oriented, and this guy is responsible for selling probably 9 million or more racing bikes. I know, I do not know Lance personally, and I don't have any strong feelings about him one way or another, but he sold a lot of bikes for a lot of people, and there was something in the bicycle industry known as the Lance effect. And basically that was older guys buying race bikes and riding in this kind of clothing and those kind of bikes and riding because the bikes cost a lot of money and you could afford them. So Lance sold a lot of bikes regardless of whatever else he did. And bicycles copying motorcycles more and more. This is a downhill bike, but you see the motorcycle influence in there. And this is sort of an extreme extension of racing, but this is almost the face of mountain bike riding today. And now we're coming to electric bikes. And these are 4 different styles. I think the one on the upper right there, I think it's a BMW. And then there's sort of a retro style on the lower left and some other funny styles. But electric bikes, or e-bikes as they're called, are going to be, you can get them now for, I don't know, $2,500 to $5,800, something like that. And they're getting smaller and smaller too. That one there has training wheels. And so e-bikes are, I mean, this is sort of my prediction. E-bikes are going to take over. I think the prices will drop, technology will improve dramatically. And I don't think e-bikes are going to get people out of their cars. If you want to stay out of the weather, you stay in your car. If you have to take some kids or go grocery shopping and get a lot of stuff, a car is practical. So I don't think e-bikes are going to do that. And I don't think they will get people off of motorcycles, because the motorcycle, remember, it's got like 115 years of development and perfection. And it's faster, and they're quite efficient. And so maybe some motorcycle riders will drop down to e-bikes, but I don't see that happening a lot. Yeah, by 2018, that may even be late. I think probably by 2017 that will happen. Everyone's going to have electric bicycles. I think Tesla will have them by 2019, and I'll bet Apple by 2020. It's going to happen. I mean, if Tesla had a $15,000 e-bike, people would buy it because you can get a Tesla. Hey, I got a Tesla. And so what's going to happen with e-bikes? And I'm not against e-bikes. I mean, I want to make that clear. I'm not against e-bikes, but they're going to ride with cyclists. So they're going to ride in bike lanes, because you can go 20 miles an hour on an e-bike unassisted, maybe up to 30 if you pedal really hard on it. So that's not fast enough to go into traffic, and they are called bikes. So there's going to be issues with, well, do they get to go in the woods on bike trails? And then how big are the tires going to get? And so there may be like quiet motorcycles in the woods. And okay, well, I guess I'm coming to the end, but I also want to, I actually have another. Yeah, okay. My intent here was to give you sort of a wide-angle snapshot of how bicycles evolved and why you have a bicycle if you have a bicycle. It wasn't a complete history, a detailed history of the bicycle. I left out some dead-end species of the bicycles, and I left out, there were some other variations of the bicycle that I left out. But if you remember half of this, if you remember half of it, you'll know 99% more than all the other bicycle riders in the country. So you will at least know that. And I also, the astronomy and astrophysics kind of stuff, well, it all came to me in a dream. But I think, and I trust my dream, so I think if you were to check up my facts, you'll find that they're close enough to the truth on that. But the purpose here is to let you see the bicycle that you have sort of in a bigger context. And if this connection with the Big Bang and the evolution of the universe and all that stuff, if it makes you look at your bike with a little bit different eye, a little bit more reverence, just because it's kind of neat to see the whole connection, then that's a good thing. And also consider that no matter what bike you have, if it's a good bike or if it's a $99 Walmart bike used or something, it doesn't matter. By historical standards, it is a fantastic bike. It is really a great bike. It's easy. I deal with fancy bikes and whatever, so it's easy to sort of get into the trap of looking at a bike and saying, oh, that's a crummy bike or whatever, or, for $150 brand new, how could it possibly be good? But by historical standards, it's a fantastic bike. You could take the worst brand new bike in a Target or a Walmart today and bring it back to 1900 or, oh my God, bring it back to 1876, and you would be God of the world with that bike. So the bicycle is so efficient that it's kind of hard to make one that doesn't work really well. The bugs are out of them. There may be cheaper ways of making them, cheaper components, but the foundation is there, and they work great even without an electric motor. Questions? Yes. This is the questions.
You began your entertaining lecture with the word relevant. And it just seems to me that we're missing a bet by not calling the bicycle a wellness machine. Most of us are living longer, and we want to live longer without being frail and feeble. And fitness is all in about the legs, and the bicycle is a leg machine. So think about marketing the bicycle as a necessary 2015 wellness machine to keep adults out of the hospital.
Well, I think that's a good idea. And, bicycles are used in rehab places also because it's easy on the joints. It's a great way to get exercise. Here's the thing about a bicycle is that you have to keep your legs strong, because if you don't, and you all know people that this has happened to, when you're old and your legs are not strong, and then you fall and break a hip and you're in a wheelchair, you will never get out of the wheelchair unless you have a reserve strength in your legs. So for nothing else, do squats, ride a bike, keep your thighs strong. It will literally keep you out of a wheelchair. And also, one other thing, strength is the biggest component of balance too. Gymnasts are well balanced because they're so strong. So if you have strong legs, you're less likely to fall. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I think that you said that for the future, the bike lanes and cars need to be separated, maybe with a harder barrier. Or what do you feel the future in our society is to promote biking? It's scary out there, even with bike lanes in Pensacola or Portland, Oregon, wherever, it's still pretty dangerous. So how are we going to keep bicycles going on and maybe be a bigger part in our society? Is it going to be a barrier, a solid barrier?
I'm not speaking for the rest of the bike industry on this. I know that opinions vary widely on how to ride a bicycle in traffic. I'm all for separating traffic. I'm all for physically putting a barrier between cars and bicycles. I don't think that can practically be done. Wider bike lanes, yes, but I would like to see separation. Myself, I always take a bike path in preference to the road. There are some other cyclists out there who say, well, I am traffic, I am traffic. I have a right to the road, and all that is fine, but you aren't going to win a crash, with the car. You aren't going to win it. So I am for separated lanes where it's possible. It's just hard to get the funds and hard to build it, but I'm totally all for it. Yes?
Thank you. Are you going to tell us about your Rivendell bicycles and why we should use those and how they compare with the race-based bicycles that you don't like?
Well,
Go ahead.
Okay, well, our bicycles, for some of you who don't know, we sort of have straddled the fence between, oh God, I don't know how to say this. Okay, we do steel bicycles. I don't have a picture of them. We have steel bicycles only. They're made with lugs, these sort of an artsy ornamental, but also structural frame joint, the way a lot of old bikes used to be made. So they're expensive bicycles. They start now at about $2,600, although we have a $1,500 model coming out in the fall. So they're expensive, and yet they aren't racing bicycles, and that makes them a little bit odd, in the world of bicycles, because usually when people spend a lot of money on a bicycle, they expect to get a racing bicycle. And the thing is, in many fields, like in photography or something, or music, you look at what the pros use and you figure that they have the best equipment and you get it. And an amateur can sort of benefit from that. But in bicycle riding, it doesn't work. You look at what the pros use, and the pros use these fringe machines that are on the brink of dysfunction. Everything has been pared away from them so that they can go fast, and they have their own team mechanics. They don't have to fix their own flats. If the Tour de France, and I strongly believe this, if you had to do your own mechanics on the Tour de France and you had to ride the same frame the entire Tour de France and fix your own flats, then we'd have, smart, functional race bicycles. But as long as that's not the case, then they're gossamer bikes that are ready to whatever. Yes?
Just a comment. I love biking. In 1971, when I had a lot more hair and less sense, I bought a Swin Super Sport and rode around Florida on it, over 1,000 miles. A great trip. And people were friendly, nice, and talked to you, offer food. 4 years later, in 1975, I made another trip around Florida, entirely different attitude. The people didn't want to see you on the road, and the truckers would try to blow you off the road. It was really bad. And I'm going down the highway, seeing all these dead animals on the side of the road, and I'm thinking, damn, that might be me. And so I came back home, and my life progressed, and a friend of mine, Dr. McConnell, riding across the bridge from Gulf Breeze to I got bumped off the road by, we think, probably a drunk. And so as much as I like bicycling, I don't bicycle, but I have a stationary bike at home, but you can't compete, you can't argue with that man's bumper. And so I'm very timid about it. My neighbor here, he loves biking still. He got no sense, but I love biking. But what do you do about that?
Again, I'm not a spokesman for other bicycle people or companies or anything, but it's going to get worse with texting and more distractions. It is going to get worse. It is. I commute by bicycle every day. I ride downtown, but whenever there is an option with less traffic, when I look, if I can ride a bike lane, I have to go a little bit out of my way. At least I can believe with confidence that no car is going to hit me on that. And I mean, if you look at people on the road, I mean, where I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, people are looking down, you know what they're doing, it's illegal. And it's so distracting. So, I don't have any encouraging words. I'm all for bike lanes, separate facilities right now. It didn't used to be. I used to take my place in traffic. I would ride down the center of the lane as long as I was going as fast as traffic was. I would behave like a car because it was my right. The law supported me, but it is, it's not worth it. I love bicycle riding. I'm not going to give it up. I just, ride with groups maybe. I mean, I guess, it could mow down a lot in once, but at least, be more visible. I'm a big proponent of bright clothing, just being visible. Because if you get in a bike accident, if you get in an accident with a car, the police will show up and people will start questioning. And guess what? You are not going to be the one that's answering the questions because you're on the gurney. And the motorist is going to say, I didn't see him. I didn't see her. And, that's a legitimate answer a lot of the time. But even when it's not a legitimate answer, not an honest answer, it's going to be the answer. So if you are garish, if you're bright, if you're lit up, that will be less likely to be used as an answer. Yes?
Thank you for being here. And this may overlap the safety issue that you just mentioned, but the one thing that concerns me as a former touring cyclist are the recumbent bikes that I see that I do not embrace in my cycling, in my love of cycling. So I'm a around the neighborhood kind of rider. Can you make a comment whether it be any historic evidence of the recumbent geometry or the contemporary recumbent geometry? You didn't mention it anywhere in your presentation, so I'm just curious, just general short comment on recumbent bikes.
I did say I skipped over a few things. I feel like some of these questions I have to dance around with my answers, but recumbents, you guys know what a recumbent is. You sit down like you're in a sofa and you pedal the bike, and there's top of the seat steering, under the seat steering, long wheelbase, short wheelbase. Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Easy for you to say. Where's the fallout going to come? It's, I mean, personally, this allows me. Personally, I like to be more visible than I am in a recumbent. Personally, I prefer to have my head much higher than bumper level on a car. And also, personally, I like the agility of a regular bike. I like, if I'm going down that, I like to be able to do a U-turn right there. I don't want to have to take a big sweeping, large radius turn just to turn around. I like to be able to hop on a sidewalk and not, get back on the road, just point the bike in a direction. But, recumbents are what a lot of people go to recumbents from extreme racing bikes. They are so uncomfortable on extreme racing bikes that they think, well, this is what all bikes are. But, you can get a bike like that 1900 bike, with the handlebars higher than the saddle, cushy tires. So there's a happy medium. Recumbent is an extreme reaction to a racing bike. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But if you go like right about here in the spectrum, then you're good. Ride 38 millimeter tires or bigger at 50 PSI or lower. Get the handlebars higher than the saddle. There's this notion that, to ride a bike, you've got to have your body like that. When you go to work in your cubicle at your desk, you don't lean over like this and type away like that. You don't do anything like that. You don't walk like that. And so this idea that you have to ride a bike like that for aerodynamics, it is kind of absurd. Aerodynamics are not the major retarding force of you, if you even care about speed. I mean, aerodynamics only become a factor above about 23, 24 miles an hour. And come on, you know. Okay. Yes.
Just one comment, kind of to respond to the safety issues. And there's a competing event going on. It's over by now, called the Rite of Silence. And many of the local area cyclists rode that event starting at 5:30 around the airport, just for the purpose of honoring cyclists like Fenner McConnell and Roger Gruters who have died on bicycles, but to raise awareness for cycling. And I think advocacy is a big thing, and raising awareness among our politicians about building better bike lanes and building a more bicycle-friendly city. So we can all be a part of that. Bicycling is a great thing to do, whether you ride for race or for fun or just to get to and from work. And we do need a safer environment. So
Yeah, that is for sure. I think, you know, the more people ride,
let's get away from the heavy questions. I noticed on your website you talk about bicycle camping. Can you tell us about that a little bit and what one of your favorite trails is?
yeah, well, we have this concept that sometimes if you have an idea and you don't give it a name, then it doesn't have a handle for people to grab and understand. And so the concept is just get on your bike, ride someplace, set up a tent, get out your sleeping bag, camp overnight, and come back the next morning. So the label that we've given these is S240 for sub 24-hour overnight. The idea is that you leave at 7 o'clock in the evening after work, and you come back by 8 o'clock the next day, or something like that. You have to work it out around your schedule. But like, I grew up backpacking and mountaineering, climbing, spending a lot of time in the woods, and I was used to that stuff. And then, I got a job, got a business, got a family, and I never got to go out in the woods anymore. And, I have the gear, I'm comfortable sleeping outside. And so, we started just, myself and some friends and coworkers, you get on a bike and say, well, I can make this quick. I don't have to fret about packing, about having everything perfect. I don't have to plan because it's not a week long. It's one day. If I forget something, no big deal. I will survive. If I bring too much, also no big deal. I only have to bring it for one day, and I'll learn from it. So you end up with a checklist. And if you have open space around you, and we're lucky where we are to have a lot of open space, it's not always totally legal camping, but it's totally moral, totally ethical camping, so.
Yeah. On that ambiguous but lovely point, let's thank our speaker.
Oh.